Thank you very much, Bob. And for those of you not from the West, the Notre Dame Hounds to which he referred, a famous school out west that's produced about 25 guys who have played in the National Hockey League. It's one of Canada's best sort of factories of elite hockey players. I wasn't one of the hockey players, as you can tell. But I am really glad to be here. Thanks very much for the invitation, because I really regard the building trades unions as key partners in our efforts to build a more prosperous Canada. And I'm delighted with the work we've done together on what I call the skills agenda, and I'm going to talk about that today. You know, we've got a lot going for us in this country. We've seen the creation of about 1.1 million net new jobs since the big global downturn in 2008-9. We have one of the strongest fiscal positions, at least at the federal level, of any of the major developed economies. We've got low taxes, the lowest federal taxes since the mid-1960s, actually, low interest rates. And, you know, the Bloomberg big business news service last week said that Canada's the best country in the world in which to do business. Our trade markets are expanding. We've gone from 4 to 43 basically tariff-free export markets, which is great. And I know you just heard from and have been talking a lot during your conference about the huge opportunities in construction and for the building trades with the enormous investments being made in our resource sector. I'm from Alberta. We all know about that out there, but it's not just a prairie phenomena. Whether you're in the offshore in Newfoundland with the oil and gas, or at some of the major mining developments in Labrador, or northern Quebec, où il y a pas mal de nouveaux investissements dans l'industrie minière, ou le nord de l'Ontario, with the Ring of Fire in northern Ontario. And of course, with uranium and potash, oil sands and gas in Saskatchewan and southwestern Manitoba, the big oil sands projects in northern Alberta, the energy infrastructure and pipeline projects that you've just heard about, mining and other projects in northern BC. And I was up in the three northern territories, Yukon, NWT, and Nunavut in February, and I can tell you billions of dollars of potential investments there. Some people are calling this Canada's new industrial revolution. Hundreds of billions of dollars of investments. And for those projects, and by the way, you know, sometimes I hear these kind of elite academic economists who sort of denigrate Canada's economic history as, quotes, hewers of wood and drawers of water. They say we should all be about high-tech urban service economies, and we should forget about those core industries that actually built this country. This town we're in right now, Hull, was founded by hardworking folks who built canals so they could service the forestry industry 150 years ago. That is our history, and it's something we should be proud of. Because what the data tells us, all the stats tell us, that generally the best paying jobs in Canada today are in the resource sector. And most of those jobs are in actually building the extractive industries, building the mines, building the big projects, building the infrastructure to support them, and that's where you and your members come in. So really the sky is the limit, and in the foreseeable future in Canada with these hundreds of billions of dollars of new capital investments, and if we have a challenge, I believe, in seizing that opportunity, it's going to be in having adequate numbers of skilled workers in the construction trades in particular to do the work that's coming on stream. And that's really what I want to talk to you about. You know, not only do we have expanded trade markets and hundreds of billions of dollars of new, current, and pending investments in the extractive sectors in mines, oil, and gas, we're also investing more as a country in core infrastructure, in roads and transportation infrastructure to help people get from A to B and make our whole economy more efficient. For example, since 2007, the Government of Canada has invested over $33 billion in the Building Canada Plan, the largest investment in infrastructure of any in history of the federal government. And we just launched the new Building Canada Plan, which is a $53 billion that is directed towards infrastructure that municipalities and provinces will also be participating in. A key component of that is $22 billion in the gas tax fund, which we've doubled, we've indexed, and we've made it permanent in legislation so municipalities can bank on it. This means It means major building projects in our cities, in our communities, for rapid transit, for roadways, for waterworks, for all of the core infrastructure, and we're going to need your union members to help build those projects. But as things stand, as I say, if we have one challenge in seizing all these opportunities, it's going to be that we're not producing enough young Canadians to take up all of those opportunities. You know, we have one of the highest rates of university enrollment in the world. And yet, for 30 or 40 years, our education system has been guiding young people away from vocations and technical skills and trades, the kind of skills that your members have and that we need. Because I know a lot of your members are baby boomers. They're in their 50s. And you know, it's interesting, I always hear these statisticians say, oh, don't worry about it. There's not going to be any shortages in the skilled trades because people are working longer. Well, you know what? If you're working a white-collar office job, yeah, maybe you can work till 70 or into your 70s. But if you're out there in hard and often tough physical labor day after day, you know what? People aren't, in those trades, in those occupations, typically aren't going to be working until they're 70. They're going to be retiring earlier than that. So we've got this wave of baby boomers in many of your occupations, many of your trades and unions, who are going to be going to retirement in the foreseeable future, if they haven't already started, and taking their skills and experience with them. And many years ago, provinces largely shut down our vocational high schools. They underfunded and kind of pushed to the sides our shop classes and vocational classes in the secondary school system. And we've been telling our kids now, for the better part of 30 years, that if they want to realize their potential, they got to go to university and get an academic degree. And the truth is, a lot of those people, as more and more data is telling us, StatsCan had a study on this last week, more of those bright young people have done what their high school counselors and their parents and our society have sort of told them to do. They went and got that degree and they found themselves underemployed, without a trade, without a qualification that actually leads to a good paying job. Now, the Canadian Construction Association says that we'll need 300,000 new construction workers in the next decade. The mining industry says they'll need 145,000 by 2020. The petroleum sector estimates a gap of 130,000 workers by the end of the decade. The Association of Canadian Community Colleges says that in less than 10 years, employers will not be able to find qualified candidates for 1.5 million job openings. Skills Canada, which promotes the trades, as you know, with our support, says we're going to need 1 million skilled trade workers by 2020. The Conference Board of Canada says that Ontario alone is losing out on $24 billion in economic activity because employers can't find people with the skills they need. The Chamber of Commerce says the same thing, and on and on. Now, some people say there's no labor shortage, and that's true. There's not a general labor shortage in Canada. But there are clearly gaps when it comes to certain skills, and particularly in certain industries. And we shouldn't bury our head in the sand when it comes to that. So how do we address it then? Well, first of all, look, education is not a federal responsibility. It's primarily provincial. But we've got to encourage our provincial governments, our school boards, our school administrators, our teachers, the teachers' unions. We've got to encourage all of those folks to work together to re-engineer the education system so that young people graduate from high school on track for training that will lead to good paying jobs. I'm glad to hear the government of BC is actually not just talking about this, but actually delivering on policy in this respect. Like, the question is, we spend tens of billions in subsidizing universities. That's great. Degrees lead to good livelihoods in most cases, and we don't want to denigrate universities. But the question is this. Did you know we have to tell our young people that they can make significantly more in, for example, $63,000 as a plumber, as opposed to $52,000 for someone with a bachelor's degree in political science. We have a surplus of those in Ottawa, I guarantee you. 71 grand salary compared to for someone who's a heavy industrial equipment maintenance technologist, compared to $45,000 for someone with a history degree. $64,000 income for an electrical and power transmission installer compared with $33,000 for someone with a music degree. Music's great. We all love music, but we should let young people know that they can make twice as much if they go into something like electrical.
Still play music.
And they can still do music as well. That's, by the way. Thank you, Bob. And, you know, I was just in London, in England, with some of your members of the building trades, including Chris Smiley. We found out that people who do apprenticeships in the United Kingdom make £150,000 more over their lifetime than people who go to university. That's the equivalent of $275,000. So we got all of this data that's coming out, and we want to put it in a package that's like interesting and relevant to young people, the downloadable applications. So if their high school counselor or their parents don't tell them that they're going to do better in terms of their economic opportunities as a plumber or an electrician or a tradesman, then somewhere they can get that information and make an informed choice. So we need to, I just think we need to get governments having the dollars go to those areas of education, whether it's vocational high schools or trades training programs or our polytechnics or supporting apprentices, as opposed to just subsidizing more and more certain university programs that do not lead to good employment. Now, one of the challenges in this area, let's be honest, is that some of the young people who show up for trades training at our community colleges, polytechnics, or go into apprenticeships lack basic literacy. That's another question. Why are they getting out of high school without basic literacy? But the Canadian Apprenticeship Forum and the Canadian Council of Directors of Apprenticeship, those are the folks, of course, who run the Red Seal system, have identified the lack of literacy skills as a barrier to apprentices completing their program and gaining full certification. And so your organization, Canada's Building Trades, has asked me to support, my ministry to support a project in partnership with Ottawa's Frontier College to address that. And I'm pleased to announce today that I just signed off this morning on a $1.3 million grant to build the Canada's Building Trades to do just that. That's going to help 525 people receive help through this project so that they can get into good apprenticeship programs. Now, I mentioned I went to Europe with Chris Smiley and a bunch of other also with Terry Parker from the Saskatchewan Building Trades, a number of other unions, a bunch of folks from the construction sector, the employers. We went there to see how come they do so much better than we do in preparing young people for jobs. Now, do you know in Germany, they have 350 apprenticeable trades, as opposed to about 150 in Canada. So it covers a much wider spectrum of occupations. And typically, about 2/3 of young Germans at the age of 16 go into a paid apprenticeship program, where they spend about 3.5, 4 days on a work site, where an employer is involved, paying them a good stipend of about €1,000 a month, and then they spend 1.5 days roughly at a vocational college, learning the theory to back up what they're doing at the work site. Practical, integrated, experiential learning where the employers and the educators are totally integrated, working together. The unions are there as well. The young people are getting paid to learn real, practical, marketable skills. Typically, those programs, those apprenticeship programs last about 3 years in Germany, which means on average they're graduating with a certificate at the age of 19, and 95% of them go into a job for which they were trained, typically with the employer who gave them the apprenticeship. And that's why Germany's unemployment rate for youth is 1/2 of what it is in Canada. We've got lots of smart young people going and getting university degrees. They come out of that with $20,000 of debt, and they're stuck in underemployed in a service job until a growing number of them in their mid-20s realize they're going to have to go to college, maybe pick up a trade. I think we've got it backwards. I think we should start by encouraging our young people to pick up a skill like that, because we need them too, by the way. As I said, we're going to realize our economy's potential. Now, we can't just transplant the German system here. There's a lot of differences in culture and legal systems. But surely we can pick up some of those ideas, and one of them has to be that if the employers want the workers they need to build these big projects, they've got to invest in training. You know, every employer, that's right. I don't know if Jim Sinclair is here from the BC Federation of Labour, but I was speaking to all the top business leaders in BC a few months ago, and there was one union table at the BC Business Summit, and they were the only table to give me a standing ovation, because I said this. I said, every business organization in the country comes to me to talk about labor and skills shortages. They say that's their number one problem. And sometimes they say they need temporary foreign workers, or they need immigrants, or they need this and that. And I say to them, why is it that in Canada, governments spend more on skills training and job training than any other developed country in the world, but the private sector spends less here? It's not acceptable. Look, there's a lot of great employers who invest in apprenticeship programs, and I don't want to discount their investment. But as a general rule, we need to encourage Canadian businesses and employers to invest in the workforce of the future. You in the building trades have some brilliant training shops around the country. I've visited a number of them. And I want to commend you for the great work that you are doing. And through your collective bargaining agreements, I know a lot of the major construction employers are putting money on the table through their contributions, and then you do the training at your union training shops. That's great. I'd like to see an expansion of that model. But this is why we brought in the Canada Job Grant. The idea there, especially for the small and medium-sized businesses, their problem is they don't have a lot of capacity. They put a few $1,000s into training someone up. As soon as they got their ticket or their certification, they get poached away by a major company with deeper pockets and a bigger payroll. So we've got to offset the risk for the small and medium businesses to put more money into training. That's the idea of the job grant. We're going to offset about 2/3 of the costs for them in incremental training. They will, and by the way, governments spend billions of dollars in Canada on training, job training programs, but a lot of it is training for jobs that don't exist, or it's training for the sake of training. The idea behind the job grant, we want to thank Building Trades for supporting it, is to actually link the training to a real job, and that's what works in Europe. So the employer will say, I know this young woman or man has the basic aptitudes to succeed in this job. They just need this training. The government will come and help us offset part of the cost. That reduces our risk if the person gets poached away. That's the idea behind the Canada Job Grant. A lot more needs to be done. And the most important thing coming out of our Germany trip and our trip to the UK is this. In those European countries, they have what they call a parity of esteem between different kinds of training and different kinds of jobs. What do I mean by that? Well, let's face it, let's be blunt. Here in Canada, we've sent all sorts of signals to our young people that if they don't go to university and get a degree, or college and get a kind of an academic diploma, that somehow they are not realizing their potential. That if instead they go and they take a trade and get into an apprenticeship program, that somehow they're not doing themselves justice. You know, in Europe, they have the opposite view. They believe, and this is what everyone told us over there, that an apprenticeship certificate, a journeyman's ticket, has exactly the same value and worth economically and socially as a university degree. And we all together in this country, political leaders, educators, parents, unions, have to send that message that a trade is just as valuable, if not more so, than an academic degree in our society. Now, we've done a lot of things to support apprenticeships. We brought in the Apprenticeship Incentive Grant, $2,000, $1,000 for each of the first 2 years. We brought in the Apprenticeship Completion Grant. If they get to the 4th year and get their ticket, that's $4,000 package. We also brought in the Employer Apprenticeship Tax Credit to help cover some of the costs of employers on the apprenticeship. We brought in the Tools Tax Credit. We brought in a policy that allows employers to pay up to 95% of the regular salary while their apprentice is on the block training without their regular income, without any penalty. And we have just launched in this budget a pilot to support flexibility in apprenticeship training. So if some young guy is up, you know, one of the problems we have is this. We've got like 350,000 young Canadians registered in over 300 apprenticeship and skills training programs, but only half of them get to completion and get their journeyman status. So we have a real problem with apprenticeship completion. And I believe one of the reasons is because some of these apprenticeship jobs are paying so well. You know how it is. You get some guy in his 20s, and he goes up to Fort McMurray, and he's making $35, $40, $45 an hour. It's big money for a 20-year-old, 25-year-old. And by the way, his expenses automatically go to that level, right? He signs up the big truck, and he's got an apartment in Edmonton, and the next thing you know, that's his burn rate. He's making as much as he's burning. So to take 2 months off and go to NAIT, go to SciAst, go to BCIT, and do his block training is a huge opportunity cost. So a lot of them get shackled by golden handcuffs in the apprenticeship stream. We need to soften the blow when they go, or that's one of the reasons we brought in this EI thing. And I'm also pleased to tell you that in this year's budget, we announced that we are going to give those young people access to the Canada Student Loan Program so they can get interest-free loans of up to $4,000 during their block training. We didn't just do that to help them finance the block training. We did it to send a symbolic message that the kids who are in apprenticeship programs are worth every bit as much as those who are in university programs. And sorry if I'm going over time. And you know, that's also why we have this flexibility pilot. If someone is in a remote area in northern BC and they're in they don't want to leave the workplace and take the big cut to move to one of our cities for a 2-month block training program at a college, let's do it online. Let's find innovative ways of delivering the block training, the theory. That's another thing we're going to be supporting. We also need greater labor mobility. We got to get provinces, in my view, to knock down these, like, what the heck's going on? We got 28 countries in the European Union. You can move between all of them with reciprocity with your trades and your professions, but you can't completely do that yet in Canada. And I know this is that some of these subjects are not, you don't all agree with me on this, but I got to say, I believe that we shouldn't have journeyman apprenticeship ratios that are more than absolutely necessary for workplace safety. In some of the Western provinces, it's typically 2 to 1. In this province, in some cases, it's 5 to 1. That, I think, is a barrier to the good SMEs who want to get into the apprenticeship program. We should find ways to break down barriers to apprenticeship participation. I guess one last thing, because it's in the news, this temporary foreign worker program. Take that as an example, please. Look. You know, I think most of the building trades recognize that in some major projects, we don't have an adequate labor supply in Canada, and sometimes you need skilled people from abroad, as long as they have that skill. And we want to make sure that people are not coming into this country, taking jobs away from Canadians, and there have been cases of that I take very seriously. And if you are aware of cases, bring them to our attention, and I've made it clear that we are going to begin investigating and prosecuting employers who lie on their labor market opinions for criminal sanctions. Criminal sanctions. At the same time, we've opened up a new skilled trades permanent immigration program. So if someone has 2 years of work experience in Canada in a trade and or a Red Seal, Canadian Red Seal certification, they can come here now as a permanent resident. They can join a building trades union, they can pay dues, they can be good, high-quality workers. Because since the early 70s, we shut our immigration system to people who work in quote-unquote blue-collar jobs. Now we've reopened the door specifically for tradesmen. So, folks, these are, I think, all steps in the right direction, but at the end of the day, it has to happen in partnership. That's what they do in Germany. It's the governments, unions, employers, all working in the same direction. We need a lot more of that in Canada, and I want to close by thanking Canada's building trades for being focused on prosperity, because you've been supporting these big resource developments. You understand the potential they have for your members' standard of living and for our country's prosperity. We may not agree on absolutely everything, but I think fundamentally we are of one mind when it comes to pursuing those opportunities and making sure that young Canadians have the skills to do so. Thanks very much, and keep up the great work.